It is such a human data source that we're working with. I mean, literally, when we speak, that language is our tool for saying what we want, what we need, what we feel. It is the most human source of data we have.
Welcome to Socially Conscious AI, where we showcase innovative AI applications for social good and interview experts and thought leaders shaping the future of AI with a focus on ethical and inclusive practices. I'm Valencio Cardoso, here with my co-host, Roman Bercot. Roman, how's it going?
It is going great, Val. I'm excited to welcome Amy Brown, the founder and CEO of Authenticx, to the Socially Conscious AI podcast. Amy's a visionary leader in healthcare technology with over 2 decades of experience in the industry. She founded Authenticx to harness the power of AI-driven conversational intelligence, helping healthcare organizations listen to and act on patient voices at scale. Amy's innovative approach combines advanced AI with the expertise of healthcare professionals, ensuring meaningful and accurate data insights. Her commitment to ethical AI and mitigating biases has set a new standard in the industry. Under her leadership, Authenticx is transforming patient care by providing valuable insights that drive innovation and improve healthcare outcomes. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. So great to be here.
Thanks for being on, Amy. I understand that Authenticx is leveraging AI to make a significant impact on healthcare. Could you start by telling us what Authenticx is and the core problem it aims to solve in the healthcare industry?
In the industry, there's a class of technology called conversational AI. But if I could rename it into my own name, I would call it listening AI, because what we're doing is leveraging conversation data for the purpose of listening to understand and listening to drive action within healthcare enterprises. So we're taking these masses of unstructured data files, that when you call into a customer service line and you hear this call is being recorded for quality purposes, you've all heard that when you've called for your own customer service woes. Those recordings turn into digital files that often are just sitting on a server, not serving any purpose for the business. Similarly, there are chat files, there are email files, all these bi-directional conversations that are in the form of unstructured data. And for all of history that has had those interactions, we haven't really leveraged them for any good because it's really challenging to add structure and meaning to unstructured data. And so the problem that Authenticx solves is it allows for using AI, it allows for healthcare organizations to start to add structure, meaning, and value to this unstructured data set. And we can then listen at scale within these organizations to truly understand the voices of their customers. And that has huge implications for the customers themselves, but also for the business results that these companies are looking to achieve.
Yeah. So it sounds like, it's listening and helping these organizations respond to patient feedback scale then.
Yes, feedback as well as, there's a lot of unsolicited intelligence that comes from these conversations. Customers may not be saying explicitly, "Hey, I have feedback for you," in these conversations, but you can deduce from, more sophisticated algorithms what's happening in this conversation that indicates where the company itself has process gaps or technology gaps, because the customer is kind of a victim of the gap. Even if they can't articulate it explicitly in this conversation, our AI has learned how to identify problems in the healthcare journey, in the healthcare ecosystem, and feed that data back to our clients who, are looking to create efficient and effective customer journeys.
Yeah. And speaking of journeys, actually, would you mind kind of sharing a bit of your background and how you got to Authenticx? Was there a particular moment or experience that inspired you to get on this journey?
Yeah, I have a really interesting background when it comes to now being a tech founder. My education was in social work. I have my master's in social work. I immediately left my graduate program and landed in state government and advocated for vulnerable populations, child welfare community, Medicaid population. And I learned about kind of healthcare policy at that stage in my career. And then I jumped out of state government and landed for the next 20 years in the business of healthcare. And I was working in health insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies. And my roles were often managing the front line who was talking to our customers. So contact center operations, folks that were processing claims and kind of the day in, day out of managing healthcare benefits. And so I got to know the data source that we now listen to. And it became really clear to me that the other members of the C suite in all the organizations that I was serving thought of the call center or the contact center as the cost center of the
Mm.
organization. And I just had this growing kind of chip on my shoulder that was like, wait a second. I know what's in these conversations. And if we could harness them, we could actually fuel growth. We could fuel strategy. We could improve our compliance rates. We could win more business if we just listened. If we just listened and we started using this data source to drive everything about our organization and our efficiencies, our strategy, et cetera. So that kind of concept percolated for a couple years for me. And it was 2018. I was a chief operating officer of a travel medical insurance company. And I just realized over a couple of weeks that the time had come to seize the moment. And that both came from kind of a real deep understanding of the problem I wanted to solve. It also, for an idea to actually take off, it has to land on fertile ground. And I felt like the time was right for that fertile ground. When I looked at the market had been using things like NPS and customer surveys to try to understand and get in the heads of customers. And I could see that there would be a fatigue of that methodology of getting customer insight. And so I felt like the market timing was right in 2018. And so I left my corporate gig. I turned in my resignation and I got to work bootstrapping and starting to build out a prototype.
It's really incredible what a reframe of a problem, from a cost center to a value add can do for any kind of activity. And it sounds from your background like you really take a human centered approach to this technology. Again, rather than thinking of it as a cost center, as something, the cost of doing business, we have to talk to customers or, so it's like you really see this as an opportunity. I'm curious, how does AI then contribute to the value that you're generating?
Yeah. When you Google conversational AI, most of the solutions are really focused on kind of replacing that human requirement to converse, right? And the focus is on building a bot that sounds as human as possible or that can interact as as possible. And I'm not here to dog that. I'm not here to say that that is wrong, but that is not our focus. Our focus is on helping human beings understand deeply the human beings that they serve.
Hmm.
It's really about helping humans understand humans and leveraging AI to do that. We would not be able to ingest, last year, 250 million customer conversations and provide insights without the power of AI. And we've built proprietary algorithms that are able to start to organize by topics, by themes, by emotion, what is going on in these customer conversations. And a big key to our value is not just being able to listen at that individual interaction level, but to start to aggregate so that you can see the forest for the trees. if you're a healthcare leader, it's not good enough to have an anecdote of one or two customer negative feedback. It's way more powerful when you can say, hey, look, you know, we listened to 100% of the conversations that flew into our contact center last month. And we can see that 30% of them are complaining specifically about the confusion of our website on this specific page. And it's driving patients to not get the care that they need because they can't get their medication refilled. Those are the types of insights that we're able to quantify at scale. And then we still use that individual customer voice to be the illustration, if you will, to the data point. So we're really using AI to tell a macro story across 100% of your conversations, but not at the expense of uh, the humanity of the data source itself, because accessing that customer voice is critically important to our users of our platform to feel the pain point, not just see it in a spreadsheet or in a graph or a chart.
I love that what you're saying there with listening to 100% of the conversations. I can't imagine how many times I've been on a call that says, this call will be monitored for quality purposes. And I'm like, no, it's not. You guys are just, you might be recording, but then you're going to throw it away. You're not paying attention to this. Otherwise, my experience would be so much better than what it is. So hearing that you're enabling people to really hear all of those conversations and pick up that nuance, that's very encouraging for the future of these customer and patient interactions. Your website, and I think I've heard you talk about it elsewhere, the Eddy effect. Can you talk about what that is and how that metaphor applies?
Sure. So I like to spend time on a river. I love whitewater rafting, canoeing, etc. And if you've ever done that, then you've probably heard and seen river eddies. River eddies are obstructions in the current where there's an object that obstructs the flow of the water. And what happens is the water behind that obstacle circles into kind of a whirlpool effect. The eddy effect analogy came from just our observations of customer conversation data at scale, where, we know all companies have designed this beautiful customer journey map that has customers flowing through a river like it perfectly flows down the middle of the river in a current. But the reality is, when you listen at scale, you find all of these eddies where customers are getting stuck, usually because of the company's own process gaps or technology gaps or training gaps in their people. And so we built a machine learning algorithm that has learned to identify eddies. And then we marry the eddy effect machine learning algorithm with topics and sentiment models. And that's how we start to get a multi-layered 3D view of what is driving the eddy effect, what the rate of it is, what the root cause drivers are, and how it's impacting customer sentiment. And it's become a driving force for our clients. They measure their eddy effect rate. They deploy strategies to remove or reduce their eddy effect rate. And it's really important metric because it not only is an indicator of customer friction and customer negative sentiment, but it also costs money for the company because customers have to call back or text again or chat again because their problem didn't get solved. And it's just creating waste overall in the system.
Yeah, that's a really cool metaphor, actually, taking that real life kind of blockage and then turning that into like a model and an algorithm and now like an actual metric that people can leverage to measure. Have there been any particularly impactful insights that Authenticx has uncovered from patient conversations?
Yeah, I think there's a myth that these conversations are very transactional in nature, that there's not, a lot of depth or emotion to them. They're just these administrative interactions. And what we've learned is that there are insights that go well beyond, the basic delivery of a service or a product. People are talking organically in these conversations about the things that are impacting their ability to get the care that they need. that in these conversations, they're talking about issues that point to health equity. They're pointing to issues that point to social determinants of health. And we believe that conversation data is like this great leading indicator of things that we see happen in our healthcare system down the line. We're really great in our healthcare ecosystem today at measuring utilization of care. We've done a ton of innovation around diagnostics, around understanding people's biologic makeup and how that might lead to outcomes in care. But that's only half of the picture because if you don't know what customers think, feel, and intend to do relative to their own healthcare, then you can't truly predict what's going to happen down the line. And conversation data is the best source of leading indicators that you can actually do something about prior to the lagging indicator coming to fruition. And that's been the greatest kind of surprise or thing that's come up for us is this has gone well beyond just removing kind of baseline customer friction. This is about truly impacting outcomes of care if we only listen and take this data source seriously.
What are some of the primary like ethical considerations when using AI to analyze some of these conversations that you have to make?
Yeah. Well, first off, obviously these conversations can contain personally identifiable information. One of the biggest considerations is how do we protect the privacy of those individuals? There's a requirement that all companies who are recording any kind of interaction are disclosing that they're recording that interaction. So that's kind of step number one. But step number two for us on the Authentic side is, we're really focused on the insight, less about the who, the specific person. And so we have a redaction capability. It's an AI model that before any user sees the data, strips out all PII, PHI from the interaction. We also have the ability to escalate based on certain model triggers. So if there are very concerning things that are happening in these interactions, like, for example, sadly, we've heard many times customers who are struggling with mental illness and even express suicidal implications in the conversation. And so we have the ability to flag, trigger immediate response based on those types of interactions. Also, an ethical consideration is the tagging and labeling of the data itself. You can't have an AI model without first training the model with data. And so that's a really important stake in the ground that we've made is we've hired our own people to tag and label. And the people that we have hired are nurses, social workers, counselors, special education teachers, depending on the healthcare company that we're working with. We are employing people who don't just understand the spoken word, but they understand the context of the situation. And so when they're tagging and labeling, they're doing so with great care and context because they understand what's going on. We also employ a very diverse set of ears to that tagging and labeling so that it's not just one perspective that is hearing a conversation and creating a tag or a label, but it's a diverse group and they come together every week to calibrate on what they're hearing and deciding on, what the tags or labels should be so that we use an inclusive set of ears to help build the foundation layer of our AI models.
No, that's such an important point of having people who are in the industry sort of tag and label and leverage that to mitigate some of the biases, right, within the model and balance things out. I imagine like in the healthcare industry, things are pretty heavily regulated. How does that affect your use of AI to solve some of these challenges?
Well, we certainly work in highly regulated industries, pharma, payers, providers. When it comes to AI regulation, though, things are still pretty loose, right? There's not a lot of promulgated rules around it. So, what we see in the market right now is a lot of motion and churning from the market on wanting to deploy AI quickly because there's this huge push to leverage AI for all the benefits it can bring. But there's this counterforce in our healthcare ecosystem that's around, wait a second, we got to make sure we're doing it the right way. We got to anticipate what the regulations might be. We need to be responsible about this. And so we're seeing just a ton of activity within the healthcare landscape of creating Gen AI committees and corporate AI governance structures. And so we're spending a lot of time consulting with our clients and prospective clients and helping them kind of build out a model for adopting and deploying AI in a responsible way. It's quite an interesting time to be an AI company. I think lots of people think that it's all tailwinds for us, and it's not really. There's tailwinds for sure, but there's also a ton of confusion, lack of true education about both the promise and the limitations of AI. And so our philosophy is no matter what the business opportunity is, we always need to have a high degree of integrity about how we're approaching talking about AI as a solution and, make sure that humans understand their role in ensuring that AI has the intended outcome that we all want it to.
You mentioned a phrase a little bit earlier that I wanted to follow up on because I'm not familiar with it. You said that the social determinants of health. Did I get that right?
Yes.
What is
So
that?
social determinants of health, it's an industry term, and it's related to those things in our lives that impact our health that may not show up on a lab result or a diagnostic study. So think about transportation to get to your doctor's appointments, access to mental health care. Perhaps you live in a rural community and there aren't any mental health, providers. Health literacy. Perhaps you live in an area where you don't have a really good handle on what our healthcare ecosystem even is. Think about food and access to healthy food. Those are social factors in our lives that impact our ability to have a healthy life. And so the industry has started to recognize that there are not only clinical determinants of health, but there are also social determinants of your health. And we need to be listening for those things and understanding those things, because if we aren't as a healthcare ecosystem, then we're missing part of the puzzle. Now, I would say there's a third layer, and maybe we'll just name it right here and you guys can help me advertise it, but it's there are healthcare business determinants of health. And that's the ugly truth that the healthcare system needs to realize, is that when we listen at scale, we can see how the healthcare industry itself has created barriers. It's the jargon, it's the rules that aren't standardized across insurance companies and pharmacy companies that create all this complexity for us. And we literally see in these conversations how customers are missing medications, they're missing staying on their care because of the system problems and the complexities. And that is just as much of a determinant of our health as our clinical and social determinants as well.
It makes a ton of sense. In the same way, e-commerce sites have, these various barriers to getting your job done that are unintentional. Something as simple as a non-standard login form, right, can just make it just a little bit too hard to do what you need to do. And I love
Yeah.
that. With those social and business determinants of health, were you saying then that the AI is helping to identify and surface those things in a way that they wouldn't normally just come up organically?
So historically, how companies have tried to identify social determinants of health is through surveys.
Mm.
So I'm going to
Mhm.
reach out to you one day. If you pick up the phone, I'm going to ask you, do you feel like you have food insecurity? And do you feel like you have transportation to care? Right. You know, historically, we've relied on a very small data set, only those people who have answered a survey. What we're saying is there are indicators of social determinants of health, of business determinants of health, and of clinical determinants of health in these conversations. And it's all sitting there. We just need to grab it, listen to it, quantify it, trend it. And that's what we do.
That's very exciting. As you were creating the company with a really great idea and then had to probably iterate your way to get the right execution, the right shape of it, how did you know when you were on the right track?
Well, I knew early on that I was on the right track. I started out just very small bootstrapping. I built a form on a low code platform, and we actually manually listened to hundreds of conversations for our first couple of clients. We tried to grab a statistically valid sample set so that we could say, hey, whatever we're listening to is reflective of the whole. And I knew pretty early on that we had something because these companies were actually creating change based on the insights and they were clamoring for more. And one of the happy surprises was that they didn't just want like the data visualizations, they wanted to hear the examples. And those example conversations were so powerful. They have helped fuel action because it was like our users like, the data visualizations that quantify the results spoke to their cognitive brain, but the listening to the actual voice spoke to their primal brain, and the combination of those 2 things was super powerful, and so we started to say, "Hey, we know that when we scale this thing, we need to incorporate human listening as a feature, as a capability, because it's really powerful to C-suites, to executives, to leaders, to everyday users in our platform." The other thing that was really cool early on is that, we of course expected to hear problems when you start listening to conversations, but what I didn't expect was to hear incredible stories of people who are grateful, who felt like their lives had been changed and saved by a product or a service or an individual human on the other end of the line, or a therapy. And it's like the stuff that market researchers and marketing teams would just drool over and they go pay for it. And it's sitting within their existing data set. It really is. And so it was really cool to realize that there are really positive stories that can inspire and unify an entire culture within an organization. And so I knew we had something. It was in the early days that I said, okay, if we're going to do this, we need to catch the wave of AI. And so that's when we started to raise capital and become a venture backed business because we knew we needed to bring speed behind our mission.
I loved what you were touching on there about some of those human stories that you get to be exposed to. Sounds very gratifying. Are there any individual stories that you'd be at liberty to share within the constraints of privacy and such?
Sure. I can tell you a story about it's a hospital system client that we have. And it was post COVID. We were listening to a nurse triage line. So you probably within your own healthcare systems, you have a nurse triage line. It's like a 24-hour nurse line that if in the middle of the night your kid's sick, you don't know what to do, you can call and talk to a nurse. That's what we were listening to, these conversations. We noticed an uptick in trend of mental health concerns. And as we went deeper in the data set, we could see that there was a growing number of parents who were very concerned about their teenage children in the post-COVID timeframe. They were really struggling with coping with life in a post-COVID world, and they were desperate to find help for their kids. And the problem was that the nurses at the individual nurse level, they didn't have already created kind of a set of resources and talking points to be able to respond timely. And if they didn't have Authenticx, they'd probably struggle along for a while. And maybe those nurses would start to compare notes and try to escalate and elevate to their bosses, hey, we need some help here. But what happened was because we were able to catch it early and quantify the trend as growing, the leadership team within that healthcare system was able to actually respond with some resources so those nurses could respond in an effective way. And I'll never forget one voice of a parent who was just in tears, grateful for receiving, some referrals to physicians that could see her daughter. And it was a really desperate situation. And it was good to see that the hospital system was able to be responsive because they were already listening at a kind of macro view.
Wow, that's that's amazing. I think it's really insightful and important to hear how you are humanizing this whole process and this journey and really connecting organizations, the people within the organizations with the patients and the people who need this help, right? And really creating that human connection. And I imagine on the organization side, the people who are hearing some of these stories, they're probably compelled to make it better, right? Improve things. And just out of curiosity, what advice would you give to like organizations looking to implement, say, Authentics or like, AI driven conversational intelligence?
Yeah. Well, thank you for what you shared. And I think that one of my concerns about AI and the proliferation of AI is, will it really connect us or will it continue to detach us? And that's why Authenticx is what it is. It's this mission to try to allow us all to feel and see and act as humans, leveraging AI as a tool to get there, right? And in terms of advice, I would say first off, one of the most important things organizations need to do before they deploy AI is to get culturally and philosophically aligned amongst themselves about what it is they're trying to accomplish and what business results they expect to see as a result of deploying AI. I'm seeing a lot of disconnect amongst leaders around that and also expectations that may not fit with reality. I think there's a huge drive to realize efficiency very quickly. How many headcount can I reduce in my workforce? And there's a lot of short-sightedness there, right? Because you might be able to reduce workforce in one area of your business, but when you spin up AI, you don't just press a button and set it and forget it. Like you have to have human beings that are watching it, making sure it's doing what it should do, that are helping train it, tune it, that you are taking action based on what AI has found. And so you might have to reduce headcount in one area, but actually need to increase it in another area of your business. And so just approach it with common sense and a real clarity amongst yourselves on what you're trying to achieve. I think that's the biggest advice I can give. Go slow to go fast, meaning spend the time getting clear on your use case and business results and working with advisors who understand what AI can drive. And when you do that and take the time and effort to get clear there, your deployment will go much faster and hopefully the results will be what you expected.
Yeah, no, well said. And I appreciate that. And like, I think finally, like as a leader in the healthcare industry, what keeps you motivated and inspired?
That's a great question. We've been running a marathon for 6 years now, and it seems unrelenting. So building a high growth business is super intense. That said, deploying our technology in healthcare is the inspiration, right? Because it's such a complex industry, especially in our country. And we're all consumers of our healthcare system. We all are at the mercy of our healthcare system. And so it feels very personal for all of us who work at Authenticx. And because it is such a human data source that we're working with, I mean, literally, when we speak, that language is our tool for saying what we want, what we need, what we feel. It is the most human source of data we have. And so the ability to bring usefulness and meaning to it and see healthcare leaders that rarely have access to their customer on a day in, day out basis, to see them want to lean in and hear the voices of their customers and study what's really going on is really gratifying. And it gives me hope that we can actually make some progress in simplifying our system.
Thank you, Amy. This conversation has been really interesting and informative. How can our listeners learn more about Authenticx or even request a demo from your platform?
Yeah, if you go to our website, you can learn all about us and also request a demo. So it's authenticx.com, AUTHENTICX.com, and we'd love to talk to you.
Thanks for joining us for the Socially Conscious AI podcast with Amy Brown, founder and CEO of Authenticx. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And why not share this episode with someone who could benefit from this conversation? For Valencio Cardoso, I'm Roman Bercot. Until next time, stay curious, stay conscious.